The pack lands of the Iron Claw were not known for mercy, and King Eloy was not known for patience. Sarah stood before the great throne, her face obscured by a heavy, gray hood. Her skin, touched by the stepmother's curse, was gray and textured like dry earth, her eyes clouded. To the world, she was a mercy offering, the discarded daughter of a fallen house, sent to satisfy a blood debt. "You bring me this thing?" Eloy's voice boomed, echoing against the obsidian walls. He didn't even stand. He looked at Sarah with the same disgust one might afford a dying rat. "I asked for a bride of noble blood to cement the treaty, not a beggar to haunt my halls." "My lord," Sarah whispered, her voice raspy from the poison that had claimed her mother's life only weeks ago. "I am Sarah of the Silver Moon. I am the blood you requested." Eloy let out a harsh, barking laugh. "The Silver Moon must be desperate. Guards, take her to the servants' quarters. I'll not have her in my bed. If she wants to be a bride, let her marry the stones of the dungeon." As the guards dragged her away, a younger man stepped from the shadows. This was Melvin, the Alpha's son, a man known for his sharp tongue and even sharper blade. He watched the ugly girl with a curious gaze. Unlike his father, who saw only surface value, Melvin felt a strange hum in the air as she passed, a vibration of power that felt like a coming storm. "Father," Melvin said smoothly, "if you have no use for her, let her be my ward. I have need someone to manage the archives. No one will look at her twice, which makes her the perfect keeper of secrets." Eloy waved a dismissive hand. "Take the wretch, Melvin. She is yours. Just keep her out of my sight." That night, as the moon reached its zenith, Sarah sat alone in the cold stone cell Melvin had assigned her. The clock ticked closer to her 18th birthday. Only 7 days remained. Suddenly, a searing heat crawled up her spine. The gray, cracked skin began to flake away like old parchment. Her hair, once dull and brittle, flowed down her back in a river of liquid silver. Her eyes cleared, revealing irises of piercing violet. For these few hours of darkness, the curse broke. She was no longer the ash bride. She was the true Luna. But as she looked at her reflection in a bucket of water, she felt the power thrumming in her veins, a power her stepmother had tried to kill. 7 days, she whispered to the moon. 7 days until I am whole. And 7 days until this kingdom learns that the woman they rejected is the queen they cannot survive without. The servants' quarters in the Ironclaw Citadel were little more than damp stone alcoves, carved into the side of the mountain where the heat of the pack's great hearth couldn't reach. Sarah huddled in the corner, her fingers tracing the rough, scaly texture of her own skin. During the day, she felt like a gargoyle, heavy, stagnant, and brittle. But as the clock struck midnight, the sensation changed. It felt like 1,000 needles pricking her skin, followed by a rush of cool, soothing water. The gray crust fell away in flakes that turned to silver dust before hitting the floor. Her back straightened. The dull ache in her joints vanished, replaced by a predatory grace. Sarah stood, her long silver hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of starlight. 6 days, she whispered, her voice no longer a rasp, but a melodic chime. 6 days until the sun can no longer hide me. A faint click echoed in the hallway. Sarah froze. No one was supposed to be in the lower archives at this hour. She scrambled to find her heavy, gray cloak, but the door creaked open before she could pull the hood over her face. Melvin stood in the doorway, a single candle in his hand. He looked exhausted, the weight of his father's cruelty etched into the lines of his forehead. He had come to check on the ugly girl, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps out of the strange pull he'd felt earlier. The candle flickered. He dropped it. "Who are you?" Melvin breathed, his hand instinctively flying to the hilt of his sword. He didn't see the beggar girl his father had mocked. He saw a woman who radiated a lunar power so intense it made his inner wolf howl in submission. Sarah backed into the shadows, her violet eyes wide. "I am a guest of the shadows, Prince Melvin." "A guest?" Melvin took a step forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scent of her, sandalwood and moon-blooming jasmine, filled his senses. It was the scent of a true Luna, a scent he had only heard of in the ancient scrolls. "I have lived in this castle my entire life. I would have remembered a face like yours." Sarah realized with a jolt of panic that he didn't recognize her. To him, the girl from the throne room was a shriveled, cursed thing. This woman was a goddess. "I am a prisoner of your father's court," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and a strange, budding hope. "But only at night. If you reveal I am here, he will surely kill me." Melvin stepped closer, the light of the fallen candle casting long, dancing shadows across her radiant face. "My father is a blind fool," he murmured. "He seeks power in iron and blood, yet he misses the magic right beneath his feet." He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from her cheek. Sarah didn't pull away. For the first time since her mother's death, someone looked at her with reverence instead of disgust. "What is your name?" he asked. Sarah hesitated. If she said Sarah, the game was over. "Call me Lyra," she lied, using her mother's middle name. "Lyra," Melvin repeated, the name a vow on his lips. "Hide if you must, but know this. I will not let him hurt you. Not the girl he brought in today, and certainly not you." They talked until the moon began to dip below the horizon. Melvin spoke of his dream for a pack built on honor rather than fear. Sarah spoke of the stars as if they were her sisters. But as the first gray light of dawn touched the high windows, Sarah felt the familiar, agonizing itch. "You must go," she cried, pushing him toward the door. "I will return tonight," Melvin promised, his eyes burning with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. The moment the door slammed shut, Sarah collapsed. The silver hair turned to straw, the violet eyes clouded over, the radiant skin cracked into the gray mask of the curse. She was the ash bride once more. An hour later, the door was kicked open by a guard. "Up, wretch! The king has decided you aren't even fit for the archives. You're to scrub the floors of the great hall before the guests arrive. Move!" As Sarah scrubbed the cold stone, her knees bleeding, she watched Melvin walk past. He glanced at her, the ugly Sarah, and his expression was one of mild pity and annoyance. He didn't know that the woman he had fallen for at midnight was currently kneeling at his feet, covered in lye and soot. And in the distance, a black carriage emblazoned with the silver moon crest was approaching the castle. Her stepmother had arrived early. The iron gates of the citadel shrieked as they swung open, admitting a carriage draped in black silk and silver filigree. Sarah, kneeling on the cold stones of the courtyard with a scrubbing brush in her raw hands, felt a physical jolt of terror. She knew that crest. She knew the scent of bitter almonds and hemlock that drifted from the carriage windows. Her stepmother, Lady Alara, stepped onto the pavement. Alara was a woman of sharp angles and cold, synthetic beauty. Years ago, she had been a mere maid to Sarah's mother, the true Luna. Now, she wore the silver moon silks as if they were born to her, though the power she radiated felt brittle, like ice over a deep, dark well. "King Eloy," Alara purred, stepping toward the Alpha King who stood on the dais to receive her. "I trust the package arrived safely?" Eloy let out a grunt of disgust, gesturing toward the corner of the courtyard where Sarah sat, her face hidden by her matted hair and the gray crust of the curse. "She is an eyesore, Alara. You told me she was of noble blood. She looks like a creature crawled out of a dry riverbed." Alara's eyes flickered toward Sarah. For a moment their gazes met. Sarah saw the flicker of triumph in her stepmother's expression, and the flash of a silver vial tucked into the woman's belt. The same poison, Sarah realized. She's here to finish the job before my 18th birthday. She is a disappointment, I agree, Elara said smoothly. Perhaps she should be moved to the stables? Out of the way of your noble guests. She is under my charge. A voice rang out. Melvin stepped forward, his eyes cold as he looked at Elara. He didn't look at Sarah. To him, she was still just the ash bride. But he felt a strange, protective instinct flare up. My father gave her to me. She stays in the archives. She is useful for cataloging the older texts. Elara's smile didn't reach her eyes. How charitable of you, Prince Melvin. But surely, a girl so afflicted would be better served in a place where she doesn't have to exert herself? I have brought a special tonic to help her rest. Sarah's heart hammered. Rest. Elara means eternal sleep. That night, the transformation was more painful than ever. The curse seemed to fight back, sensing that its creator was near. Sarah screamed silently into her pillow as the gray skin cracked and fell, her silver radiance blooming once more. When Melvin slipped into her room at midnight, he found Lyra, standing by the window, her violet eyes rimmed with tears. Lyra, what is it? He rushed to her, taking her hands in his. I saw a woman today, your kinswoman, Elara. She is looking for someone. She seemed dangerous. She is a murderer. Melvin? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She couldn't tell him the whole truth yet. Not while the sun could still turn her back into a monster. She killed the woman I loved most. And she is here to kill me. Melvin's grip tightened. I won't let her. My father may be blinded by her flattery, but I see her for what she is. Stay here. Don't leave this room during the day. I have no choice, Sarah said, looking at the moon. In 5 days, the sun will rise on my birthday. On that day, the mask will either break forever, or it will become my coffin. As Melvin left to patrol the borders, Elara moved through the darkened halls like a ghost. She didn't head for the archives. She headed for King Eloy's private chambers. She is growing stronger, Eloy, Elara whispered into the king's ear as she poured him a cup of dark, spiced wine. The girl, she carries the seed of the old magic. If she survives until the solstice, she will have the power to unseat you. She will claim your throne as the High Luna. Eloy's eyes narrowed, his greed overcoming his common sense. She is a beggar. How could she unseat me? Because, Elara hissed, leaning in close. She is not just a bride. She is a weapon. And your son is already falling under her spell. He visits her at night. He sees what you refuse to see. Eloy smashed his wine cup against the wall. He visits that creature? If Melvin is consorting with a witch, I'll have them both burned. We end this tomorrow. At noon. The dawn of the 5th day did not bring light. It brought a suffocating gray fog that clung to the jagged peaks of the Ironclaw Mountains. Sarah felt the transformation receding with a violent wrenching of her soul. The silver hair coarsened into brittle straw, and the radiant violet of her eyes bled into a muddy, clouded gray. She was ugly Sarah once more, kneeling on the cold stone floor of the archives when the heavy oak doors were kicked open. Not by a guard. By King Eloy himself. He didn't come alone. Behind him stood Lady Elara, her lips curled in a triumphant sneer, and 2 executioners carrying heavy silver chains, the kind used to suppress a werewolf's shift. Where is she? Eloy roared, his voice shaking the dust from the ancient scrolls. He grabbed Sarah by the collar of her tunic, lifting her nearly off her feet. Where is the witch my son sneaks off to visit at midnight? I don't know who you mean, my lord, Sarah gasped, the dry skin of her throat cracking. Liar! Elara stepped forward, her hand flashing out to strike Sarah across the face. The prince has been seen entering these chambers every night. He meets a woman of silver light. If she isn't here, then you wretched thing, are hiding her in the shadows. Eloy threw Sarah to the floor. If she won't speak, we'll see if the sun coaxes the truth out of her. Drag her to the courtyard. If the midnight which loves my son so much, let's see if she appears to save this beggar from the pyre. Father, stop! Melvin burst into the room, his face pale. He looked from his father to the crumpled form of Sarah on the floor. For a fleeting second, his eyes met Sarah's clouded ones. He saw the terror there, but he still didn't see Lyra. He saw only the girl he had promised to protect as a ward. She has done nothing, Melvin said, stepping between Sarah and the king. She is a servant of this house. To kill her without cause is a stain on our honor. Honor. Eloy laughed, a sound like grinding stones. You speak of honor while you bed a phantom in the dark? Alara tells me this girl is a vessel for a curse that will topple my throne. If you want to save her, Melvin, then tell me, where is the woman with the silver hair? Melvin's heart froze. He looked at Sarah, then back to his father. He couldn't betray Lyra. He didn't realize that by protecting Lyra, he was unknowingly condemning the very woman who sat at his feet. By noon, the entire pack had gathered in the central courtyard. Sarah was bound to a wooden stake, the silver chains burning into her skin. In the sunlight, the curse was at its strongest. Her skin looked like rotting bark, her features twisted and sunken. To the crowd, she was a monster. Alara stood on the balcony, a vial of clear liquid in her hand. The sun is at its height, she announced. If no one claims this girl, she burns as a tribute to the solstice. Melvin stood in the front row, his knuckles white as he gripped his sword. He was looking for Lyra. He was praying she would stay hidden, even as his soul screamed at him to save the girl on the stake. Wait! Sarah cried out, her voice cracking. She looked at Melvin, her heart breaking. She couldn't let him die for her, and she couldn't let him live hating himself for her death. Melvin, look at me. But before he could respond, Alara poured the contents of the vial onto the wood at Sarah's feet. It wasn't oil. It was liquid moonstone, a substance that accelerated magical cycles. The reaction was violent. Instead of fire, a pillar of white light erupted from the wood. The sun was still high, but the moonstone was forcing the transformation early. Sarah screamed as her body began to tear itself apart between the day form and the night form. The gray skin began to peel back in agonizing strips, revealing the glowing silver flesh beneath. The crowd gasped. Eloy recoiled in horror. Melvin's eyes went wide. He watched as the ugly girl's face shifted, the features molding into the haunting beauty of the woman he had held in the dark. Lyra? He whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Her name is Sarah. Alara screamed from the balcony, her mask of composure finally breaking. And she is the end of us all. Kill her now. Eloy drew his sword, stepping toward the light. A changeling, a witch in my own house. But the light was too bright. Sarah's eyes snapped open, now a brilliant, burning violet. The chains began to glow red-hot. 5 days, Sarah's voice boomed, overlapping with a ghostly echo of her mother's voice. The sun no longer hides the truth, Eloy. I am the moon's chosen, and your son is the only one who saw my soul before he saw my face. With a crack that sounded like thunder, the silver chains shattered. The explosion of lunar energy threw King Eloy backward, his heavy armor clattering against the stone. The liquid moonstone had backfired. Instead of consuming Sarah, it had acted as a catalyst, bridging the gap between her two selves. Sarah stood in the center of the scorched circle. She was a vision of celestial fury, half wrapped in the tattered, gray rags of the ugly bride, but her skin shone with the iridescent sheen of a pearl. Her silver hair whipped around her like a living storm, and the violet in her eyes was so bright it seemed to bleed into the air. Seize her! Alara shrieked from the balcony, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She is a monster, a freak of nature. The royal guards hesitated. Their wolves whimpered internally. In the presence of a true Luna, the highest spiritual peak of their kind, their instinct was to kneel, not to strike. "Father, stay back," Melvin shouted, drawing his blade, but he didn't point it at Sarah. He stepped into the circle, his back to her, facing the king and the circling guards. "Melvin," Eloy roared, picking himself up from the dust. "Move aside. That thing has bewitched you. It is a curse upon our bloodline. The only curse in this courtyard is the one she wears on her skin, and you were the one who put it there by your cruelty." Melvin countered. He turned his head slightly, catching a glimpse of Sarah. The transformation was incomplete, and she was swaying, her strength flagging from the sheer shock of the premature shift. "Sarah, Lyra, whoever you are, can you run?" Sarah looked at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The woods," she whispered. "If I reach the heart tree before the sun sets, the curse won't kill me for the shift. But I need time." "Then you shall have it," Melvin vowed. With a roar, Melvin shifted. He didn't just become a wolf. He became a massive, charcoal-gray beast with eyes like molten gold. He lunged at the guards not to kill, but to create a path of chaos. Sarah didn't waste a second. She tapped into the raw, unrefined power surging through her veins and leapt. Her movements were no longer human. She blurred like a streak of moonlight, clearing the courtyard walls in a single, gravity-defying bound. "After them!" Eloy's voice followed them, raw with fury. "Bring me their heads. I will not have my son tainted by a silver moon witch." They ran until the stone towers of the citadel were nothing but jagged teeth against the horizon. The wild woods were a place of ancient, sentient shadows where even the boldest hunters feared to tread. But for Sarah, the trees seemed to lean in, their leaves whispering her name. As the sun began to dip, the agonizing reverse shift began. Sarah collapsed against the roots of an ancient oak. The silver light faded, and the gray, cracked skin began to crawl back over her arms like a slow-moving disease. Melvin shifted back to his human form, breathless and bruised. He draped his cloak over her shivering shoulders. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice soft, devoid of the anger she expected. He reached out, and this time, he didn't recoil from the rough, gray texture of her hand. He took it firmly in his. "I couldn't," Sarah rasped, the ugly mask settling back over her features. "The curse was designed to break only in the dark, or upon my death. If I had told you, and you had looked at me with disgust, I think I would have died of a broken heart before the poison could finish me." Melvin knelt before her in the dirt. "I saw you when you were ugly, Sarah. I saw a girl who deserved protection. I saw you when you were Lyra, and I saw a woman I could love. The skin doesn't matter. The power doesn't matter. It's the soul that kept me coming back to the archives." Their moment of peace was shattered by a low, rhythmic chanting. From the darkness of the trees emerged a group of figures draped in silver-gray robes. In the center was Alara, her eyes glowing with a sickly green light. She hadn't sent the guards. She had come herself, using the dark magic she had cultivated since the day she murdered Sarah's mother. "How touching," Alara mocked, holding a ceremonial dagger aloft. "The prince and the pauper. But you forgot one thing, Sarah. I am the one who wove the curse. And as long as I draw breath, you will never see your 18th birthday." She raised the dagger, and the very ground beneath Sarah and Melvin began to turn into a swirling vortex of black ash. The vortex of ash rose like a wall of choking soot, circling Sarah and Melvin. The air grew cold, smelling of ozone and the bitter almonds of Alara's favorite poison. "You think a few moonbeams and a rebellious prince can break a curse fueled by a decade of spite?" Alara stepped into the swirling debris, her eyes glowing with a toxic, emerald light. I watched your mother wither, Sarah. I watched her gasp for air while I braided her hair and whispered lies into her ear. Do you know what her last words were? Sarah pulled herself up, her gray, cracked fingers digging into the ancient bark of the oak tree behind her. The ugly mask felt heavier than ever, pulling at her features as the sun finally vanished completely. She told me to run, Sarah whispered, her voice a low growl. No, Elara sneered, raising the ceremonial dagger. The blade was carved from the bone of a fallen alpha. She told me to take care of you, and I've kept you hidden. I've kept you safe from the burden of beauty and power. But tonight the debt is settled. As Elara lunged, the moon finally cleared the canopy of the wild woods. The transformation hit Sarah like a physical strike, but this time it was different. Because she was near the heart tree, the ancient source of the forest's magic, the shift didn't just change her appearance. It unlocked the first seal of her inheritance. Melvin, get back, Sarah cried. Instead of the silver light being a passive glow, it erupted from her palms in a shockwave of pure lunar force. The ash vortex didn't just dissipate. It turned into silver butterflies that fluttered harmlessly into the night. Elara was thrown back, her back hitting a stone altar hidden in the overgrowth. The silver sap. Elara gasped, coughing up dark blood. It's impossible. You haven't reached your birthday yet. The forest doesn't care about the sun's calendar, Sarah said. Her voice had changed. It carried a resonance that made the very ground beneath them hum. Her skin wasn't just beautiful now. It was translucent, showing the pulsing silver light of her veins. Sarah pressed her hand against the bark of the oak. Suddenly, the forest shared its secrets. She saw the night of her mother's death, not through her own child eyes, but through the eyes of the trees. She saw Elara mixing the poison, but she also saw something else. Her mother hadn't just died. She had poured the last of her life force into a lunar seed and hidden it inside Sarah's own soul. The curse Elara had placed on her hadn't just been for ugliness. It had been a cage to keep that seed from sprouting. The ugliness wasn't just a curse. Was it, Elara? Sarah walked toward her stepmother, each footstep leaving a glowing silver print on the grass. It was a seal. You were afraid that if I looked like a queen, I would act like one. Elara scrambled to her feet, her face twisting. If I can't have the crown of the silver moon, then no one will. She didn't strike at Sarah. She turned and threw the bone dagger at Melvin, who was still recovering from the magical blast. No! Sarah screamed. She didn't think. She didn't use a spell. She felt the power of the strongest Luna surge, the ability to manipulate the physical world through sheer will. Time seemed to slow. Sarah reached out, and the silver sap from the trees around them burst forth, forming a shimmering amber-like shield in front of Melvin. The dagger struck the shield and shattered into 1,000 pieces. Exhausted by the display of power, Elara vanished into a cloud of green mist, her parting scream echoing through the woods. 3 days, Sarah. In 3 days, the king's army will burn this forest to the ground. Silence fell over the clearing. The silver shield dissolved, and Sarah collapsed. Melvin caught her before she hit the ground. He looked at her, really looked at her, under the full radiance of the moon. She was breathtaking, yes, but he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. You saved me, he whispered, brushing a stray silver hair from her forehead. I won't let her take anyone else, Sarah said, her voice fading as the moon began its descent. But Melvin, your father, he will come for us. He thinks I've stolen you. Melvin tightened his hold on her. Let him come. He thinks he's an Alpha King, but he has never seen a true Luna in her full glory. We have 3 days to find the rest of your strength. He looked at her gray, transforming hand as the dawn approached. And 3 days, he added, for me to show you that you don't need a mask to be loved. The dawn of the 3rd day before Sarah's 18th birthday brought a biting frost. As the silver light of her nocturnal form retreated, the agonizing gray crust returned, sealing her back into the skin of the ash bride. Melvin didn't flinch. As she shivered in the morning mist, he wrapped his heavy fur cloak around her and began to carry her deeper into the wild woods. "We are being followed," Melvin whispered, his wolf ears twitching. "But not by my father's scouts. The scent is different. It smells of old earth and wet fur." They reached a gorge hidden by a waterfall that flowed upward, a clear sign of ancient, lingering magic. As they stepped through the mist, the forest opened into a hidden valley. It wasn't empty. Dozens of wolves emerged from the shadows of the caves. But these were not the sleek, armored warriors of King Eloy's court. These were the broken ones. Wolves with scarred pelts, older wolves who had been cast out for their weakness, and young omegas who had fled Eloy's cruelty. At their center stood a massive, blind wolf with fur the color of winter wheat. He shifted into a tall, weathered man with silver-scalded eyes. "The Prince of Iron," the old man rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. "And the Shadow Luna. How do you know who I am?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking under the weight of the morning curse. The old man, Silas, knelt in the dirt before her. "We have waited 20 years for the silver moon to rise again. Your mother, Queen Lyria, sent us here. She knew the poison was coming. She knew Eloy and Alara were weaving a web of rot. She told us to wait for the girl with the ash skin and the heart of stars." Silas led them to a cavern wall covered in glowing, bioluminescent moss. The carvings depicted a woman standing between two moons, one dark, one light. "The strongest Luna is not just a title, Sarah," Silas explained as the other outcasts gathered, watching her with a mix of awe and desperation. "Most Lunas act as a balm for their alpha's rage. But the Silver Moon bloodline, you are the source. You don't just calm the storm. You are the storm." He pointed to a specific carving. "On your 18th birthday, the two halves of your soul, the Day Hag and the Night Queen, must merge. If they don't, the power will tear you apart. And Alara knows this. She doesn't have to kill you. She only has to keep you from the altar of the first Alpha until the sun reaches its peak." "Then we fight," Melvin said, stepping forward. "I have my father's training, and these wolves have nothing left to lose. We will hold the valley while Sarah reaches the altar." "It's not enough, Prince," Silas said solemnly. "Eloy has the Ironclaw army. He has Alara's dark alchemy. And he has the Sunstone, a relic that can force a shift back into the ugly form even at midnight." Sarah looked at her gray, trembling hands. She felt the strongest Luna power humming beneath her skin, but it was trapped behind the curse's dam. "I don't want them to die for me," Sarah said, looking at the ragged pack of outcasts. One young girl, barely 12, stepped forward and touched Sarah's rough hand. "We aren't dying for you, my queen. We're dying for the chance to be seen again." As the sun began to set on the evening of the second day, a horn blasted in the distance. The sound was metallic, cold, the horn of King Eloy. "How did they find us?" Melvin growled, shifting his weight. "This valley is warded." Sarah looked at the waterfall. The water was no longer flowing upward. It was falling down, stained a sickly, poisonous green. "Alara," Sarah whispered. But it wasn't just Alara. From the back of the outcast pack, a wolf stepped forward, one of Silas's own lieutenants. He held a small, glowing shard of the sunstone. He had been the one to break the wards from the inside. "Forgive me, Silas," the traitor whispered as the sky turned to dusk. "But Eloy promised us our lands back if we gave him the witch." Before Melvin could shift, the ground shook. The mountainside exploded as Eloy's elite guards, led by the king himself, poured into the valley. "Melvin," Eloy's voice boomed, "step away from the freak, or you will share her pyre." The hidden valley, once a sanctuary of soft moss and rising mist, was suddenly choked with the smell of scorched ozone and wet fur. King Eloy stood atop a jagged ridge, his golden armor catching the dying rays of the sun. Beside him, Alara gripped the sunstone, its artificial light pulsing like a dying star. "Kill the outcasts," Eloy commanded, his voice cold and devoid of any fatherly warmth. "But bring me my son in chains. And the girl, bring me her head." The Ironclaw elites descended like a landslide. They were twice the size of the malnourished outcasts, their claws reinforced with silver-tipped steel. Melvin shifted in a blur of charcoal fur, a roar ripping from his throat that shook the very trees. He met the first wave of his father's guards with a ferocity that surprised even Eloy. He wasn't just fighting for a throne or a title. He was fighting for the woman who had seen the darkness in his soul and offered him moonlight. "Stay back, Sarah," Melvin shouted through their mind link, his voice a frantic echo in her head. "Reach the heart tree. If you fall here, the silver moon dies forever." But Sarah couldn't move. The traitorous lieutenant, still clutching the sunstone shard, lunged at her. The shard's light burned her skin, making the gray scales of her curse itch with a searing, acidic heat. "You're nothing but a scavenger," the traitor hissed, his claws inches from her throat. Sarah looked around. She saw Silas, the blind wolf, being beaten down by 3 armored guards. She saw the young girl who had touched her hand being cornered by a massive executioner. The strongest Luna wasn't just about beauty. It wasn't about the silver hair or the violet eyes. It was about the alpha soul, the ability to command the spirit of the pack. "Enough!" Sarah screamed. She was still ugly Sarah. She was still the girl with the cracked skin and the huddled frame. But as she shouted, a wave of silver-gray energy rolled out from her. It wasn't the bright, blinding light of the night. It was the muted, indestructible strength of the earth. The ground beneath the Ironclaw guards turned to liquid mud, trapping their armored boots. The traitor with the sunstone shard was thrown back by an invisible force, the stone shattering against a rock. "You call me a monster?" Sarah stood tall, her gray rags fluttering in the wind. She didn't wait for the moon. She reached into the core of her curse, the very place where Alara had tried to bury her power, and she turned the cage into a weapon. The gray scales on her arms began to glow, not with silver, but with a deep volcanic violet. "I am Sarah of the Silver Moon," she cried, her voice echoing with the power of 1,000 ancestors. "And this forest does not belong to the King of Iron. It belongs to the people of the shadows." The outcasts felt it, a sudden electric surge of adrenaline. Their scars stopped aching. Their broken bones felt forged in steel. With a collective howl that drowned out the king's war horns, the broken ones surged forward, driving the elite guards back toward the ridge. Eloy watched in disbelief as his invincible army was pushed back by a girl he had called a beggar. He turned to Alara, his face purple with rage. "Use the stone. Burn the whole valley if you have to." Alara held the sunstone high, her eyes wide with madness. "It's too late for the stone, Eloy. She's merging the powers. If she touches the altar before dawn, she will be untouchable." Alara didn't wait for Eloy's permission. She threw a flask of black fire, a magical napalm, directly at the heart tree. "No!" Sarah screamed. The ancient tree erupted in flames. The connection Sarah felt to the forest began to wither. She felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her chest as the source of her power began to burn. "Sarah!" Melvin shifted back to human form, reaching for her as she collapsed, her gray skin beginning to smoke. "The tree!" Sarah gasped, her eyes fading. "If it dies, I die with it." As the forest began to burn, a dark shadow loomed over them. King Eloy had jumped down from the ridge, his sword unsheathed and glowing with a murderous light. "The play is over, Sarah," Eloy growled, raising his blade over her head. "Die like the dog you are." The heat of the black fire was unlike any natural flame. It didn't crackle. It hissed like 1,000 vipers, consuming the ancient bark of the heart tree with a greasy, emerald light. Sarah felt her lungs filling with the phantom smoke of her ancestors' memories. Every branch that turned to ash felt like a bone snapping in her own body. Eloy stood over her, his shadow long and jagged against the hellish glow. He raised his great sword, the steel etched with runes of suppression. "A queen of nothing," Eloy spat. "You will die in the dirt, just like your mother." Clang! The sound of steel on steel rang through the burning glade. Melvin had intercepted the blow, his own sword trembling under the weight of his father's immense strength. "You will not touch her," Melvin roared, his eyes glowing with a desperate golden fire. "She is the heartbeat of this land. Father, if you kill her, you kill the wolf in all of us. Then you die with the witch." Eloy put his weight into the strike, forcing Melvin to his knees. Sarah watched them through a haze of pain. She saw the outcasts being pushed back by the heat of the black fire. She saw the heart tree, the source of the silver moon's lineage, turning into a pillar of charcoal. "The power is in the seed, not the tree," a voice whispered in her mind. It was her mother's voice, cool and clear amidst the furnace. The ugliness was the husk, Sarah. But even a husk protects the life within. Sarah realized the truth. She had been waiting for the moon to make her beautiful so she could be strong. She had been waiting for her 18th birthday to claim a crown. But a true Luna didn't wait for the stars to align. She commanded them. She reached out and grabbed the burning trunk of the heart tree with her bare, gray hands. "Sarah, no!" Melvin cried out, but he was pinned by Eloy's blade. The black fire leaped onto Sarah's arms, hungry for her royal blood. But instead of screaming, Sarah began to hum. It was a low, ancient melody, the song of the silver sap. The ugly, gray skin on her arms didn't burn. It began to absorb the heat. The curse, designed by Alara to be a cage of lead and ash, suddenly found its purpose. It acted as an armor against the dark magic. Sarah pulled the black fire into herself. The emerald flames turned silver as they touched her skin. The gray scales began to glow with a blinding, incandescent white. She wasn't shifting into her midnight beauty. She was becoming something new, a bridge between the day and the night. With a final, guttural cry, Sarah released the energy. A wave of frost-white light exploded from her chest, dousing the flames of the heart tree in an instant. The emerald fire vanished, replaced by a fine, shimmering dew. The shockwave sent Eloy flying backward, his sword shattering into a dozen fragments. Alara, watching from the ridge, let out a piercing shriek as the sunstone in her hand cracked, its light leaking out like poisonous bile. Sarah stood in the center of the glade. She was no longer ugly Sarah, nor was she the midnight queen. Her skin was a translucent marble, her hair a mix of ash gray and liquid silver. She looked like a statue carved from the moon itself. "The fire," Silas whispered, crawling toward her. She ate the black fire. Eloy scrambled to his feet, his face pale. For the first time he saw not a girl, but a goddess of judgment. "Guards, kill her, now!" But the guards didn't move. They looked at Sarah, then at the heart tree, which was already beginning to sprout new, silver leaves in the middle of the winter frost. They dropped their weapons. "The king is dead," one of the guards whispered, looking at Eloy. "Long live the Luna." The sky above began to swirl. The clouds parted to reveal a moon so large it seemed to touch the mountain peaks. It was the eve of the solstice. The final 24 hours until Sarah's 18th birthday had begun. "It's not over," Alara hissed from the ridge, her voice trembling. "You saved the tree, but you've exhausted your soul, Sarah. You have 1 day left, and I still have the king's son in my sights." Before anyone could react, Alara threw a final, dark matter smoke bomb. When the air cleared, The ridge was empty, and so was the spot where Melvin had been standing. "Melvin!" Sarah cried out, her new strength failing as she fell to her knees. The king was broken, but the sorceress had taken the prince. The moon hung over the Ironclaw citadel like a sharpened blade. It was the night of the winter solstice, Sarah's 18th birthday. In the dungeons beneath the obsidian throne, Melvin was bound in chains of cold-forged iron. Alara stood before him, her eyes sunken and her skin translucent with the strain of her failing magic. She held a jagged ritual dagger to his throat. "She will come for you, little prince," Alara hissed, her voice a dry rattle. "And when she steps into this circle, I will drain the silver moon blood from her veins and pour it into yours. You will be my puppet king, and I will be the shadow that rules you both." Melvin strained against the chains, his wolf snarling beneath his skin. "She isn't the girl you broke, Alara. She's the storm you invited into your house." At the gates of the citadel, the ground began to tremble. It wasn't the rhythmic stomp of an army. It was the wild, chaotic pulse of the forest itself. Sarah led the charge. She no longer wore the gray rags of a beggar. She was draped in a cloak of silver moss and starlight, her skin shimmering with the merged power of day and night. Behind her marched the outcasts, the scarred, the old, and the forgotten, their eyes glowing with the reflected light of their true Luna. "Open the gates," Eloy shouted from the battlements, his voice desperate. "Burn them. Use the oil." But the soldiers on the walls looked down at Sarah. They saw the ugly bride they had mocked, now standing with the poise of a celestial queen. They remembered the warmth of her power in the valley. One by one they lowered their bows. "We do not fight the moon," the captain of the guard declared, stepping aside. The great iron gates didn't break. They simply dissolved into silver mist as Sarah walked through them. Sarah reached the throne room, her footsteps echoing like thunder. Eloy stood before the throne, his crown lopsided, his sword broken. "You!" he screamed, lunging at her. Sarah didn't even raise a hand. She simply spoke. "Kneel." The word carried the weight of 1,000 alphas. The gravity in the room shifted, slamming Eloy to the floor. The crown fell from his head, clattering across the stone. He was no longer a king. He was a man who had traded his soul for iron, and the iron had betrayed him. "Where is he?" Sarah asked, her voice vibrating with a deadly calm. "In the bowels of the earth." A voice laughed from the shadows. Alara emerged, dragging a weakened Melvin behind her. She had used her dark alchemy to drain his strength, his charcoal formatted and dull. The ritual circle on the floor began to glow with a sickly green light. "One step closer, Sarah, and I slit his throat," Alara warned. "The solstice sun rises in 10 minutes. If you aren't on the altar, the power will consume you. You'll explode into 1,000 pieces of starlight, and I'll be there to catch everyone." Sarah looked at Melvin. His eyes met hers, violet meeting gold. "Do it, Sarah," Melvin rasped. "Don't let her win. Claim the throne. I'm just one wolf." Sarah smiled, and for the first time it wasn't a smile of sorrow. It was a smile of absolute authority. "I am not just claiming a throne, Melvin. I am claiming to be my mate." She stepped into the ritual circle. Alara shrieked with joy, raising the dagger to strike, but the blade shattered against Sarah's skin. The dark magic of the circle didn't drain Sarah. It was purified by her. The green light turned to brilliant violet. "You forgot one thing, stepmother," Sarah whispered, leaning close to the trembling woman. "You can't steal what was never yours. The silver moon doesn't just give power. It judges it." With a wave of her hand, Sarah stripped the stolen beauty from Alara. The sorceress withered in seconds, turning into a frail, gray shadow of the maid she had once been. The curse Sarah had carried for years didn't vanish. It transferred, seeking the heart that had birthed it. As the first ray of the solstice sun hit the high windows of the citadel, the clock struck midnight for Sarah's soul. The altar of the first Alpha, situated right behind the throne, erupted in a pillar of white light. Sarah stepped into the flame. The last of the gray scales fell away, not into dust, but into diamonds. She emerged not just as a Luna, but as the High Queen. Her power stabilized, the strongest Luna, finally at peace. She turned to Melvin and snapped his chains with a thought. As he stood, the lunar energy flowed into him, healing his wounds and turning his charcoal fur to a regal, shimmering obsidian. Eloy was led away in chains, not to a dungeon, but to the wild woods, to live as an outcast among those he had once despised. It was a mercy he didn't deserve, but one Sarah granted to ensure her reign began with justice, not vengeance. Sarah and Melvin stood on the balcony, looking out over a kingdom that was no longer divided by beauty or ugliness, strength or weakness. "They used to call me the Ash Bride," Sarah murmured, leaning her head on Melvin's shoulder. Melvin took her hand, kissing the palm where the silver light now lived forever. "They were wrong. You were always the fire beneath the ash. And now, my queen, the whole world is warm. Under the light of the new sun, the silver moon and the iron claw became one. The curse was broken, the heart was healed, and the most beautiful Luna the world had ever known finally took her seat. Not just on a throne, but in the hearts of her people. The Iron Claw Citadel was no longer a fortress of cold obsidian and jagged shadows. Under the reign of Queen Sarah and King Melvin, the stones themselves seemed to have softened, entwined now with glowing lunar ivy and white roses that bloomed even in the dead of winter. 5 years had passed since the great solstice. Sarah stood on the balcony of the high tower, watching the sunset. She no longer felt the agonizing pull of the transition. The strongest Luna had fully merged her forms. In the daylight, she possessed a regal, sun-kissed glow, and at night, her silver radiance illuminated the courtyard like a second moon. The kingdom had transformed. The broken ones from the wild woods were now the royal guard, led by Silas, whose sight had been partially restored by Sarah's healing light. The distinction between Alpha and Omega had faded, replaced by a meritocracy where the heart mattered more than the howl. "The emissaries from the Silver Moon lands have arrived," a voice murmured behind her. Sarah turned to see Melvin. He looked every bit the High King, his shoulders broader, his gaze steady and kind. He walked to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "They brought gifts of starlight silk," Melvin whispered, kissing the curve of her neck. "But they were mostly shocked to see the ugly bride is now the most whispered about beauty in the 7 kingdoms." Sarah laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Let them whisper. I still keep a piece of the gray ash in a locket, Melvin, to remind me that the world only sees what it is taught to see." In the far reaches of the wild woods, in a small, humble hut, a frail old woman spent her days scrubbing floors that never stayed clean. Alara, stripped of her stolen youth and magic, lived the life she had once forced upon Sarah. It was a silent, lonely existence, a living reflection of the bitterness she had sown. And Eloy? He lived among the mountain wolves, a nameless scout who spent his nights guarding the borders of the kingdom he once ruled with iron. He had learned, through cold nights and hard labor, that a crown is heavy, but a conscience is heavier. A small, silver-furred blur suddenly streaked across the balcony, tripping over Melvin's boots. It shifted into a young girl with violet eyes and a mischievous grin. "Mama! Papa! The heart tree is glowing again!" the princess shouted, pointing toward the forest. Sarah knelt, picking up her daughter. The child carried the mark of the next generation, a perfect balance of her father's iron strength and her mother's celestial light. "The tree glows because the land is happy, Lyra," Sarah said, booping the girl's nose. As the moon rose, the people of the citadel gathered in the courtyard. They didn't gather out of fear or command, but to sing. They sang the song of the silver sap, a melody that united the day and the night. Sarah looked out over her people, her mate, and her child. The curse had been a tragedy, but it had also been a forge. It had stripped away everything superficial until only the unbreakable soul remained. The Alpha King had rejected a bride and found a queen. The sun had claimed a beggar and found a goddess. And the girl who was once ugly, in the day had brought a light to the world that would never, ever fade. If you enjoy the story, subscribe to the channel.